Good evening, everyone that has just joined us for our webinar this evening. You're very welcome. On where I am is very wet and windy. I think the same with you, Diarmuid, down in Germinal.
No, I think the whole country is nearly wet and windy today.
Fair enough. You're very welcome to our 5th webinar, focusing in on grazing brassica crops with myself, Sandra Hayes, Teagasc, and Diarmuid Murphy from Germinal. We're hosting this webinar mainly due to the fact that due to the COVID restrictions, we can't get to do our usual events that we'd either do independently or co-host together between Teagasc and Germinal. So we hope you enjoy them. The webinar is being recorded, and if you don't get to see it all, if you miss bits of it, you will be emailed the recording, so you'll be able to listen back. We encourage the interaction with questions. Every so often I'll stop Diarmuid and we'll go through the questions that have come in. So there's a little Q&A box down at the bottom of your screen. So whenever you have a question, pop it in there, and you can put your name in it or leave it anonymous. It doesn't matter, and we'll get to those during the presentation, or if not, at the end. And we have there's a survey that we'll be asking you to fill in at the end, just to let us know what you liked, what you disliked, and what you'd like for possible future webinars that might be done in the springtime. So I'll leave it over to yourself, Diarmuid. You might introduce and start up the presentation.
Perfect. Thank you, Sandra. Yeah, for those of you that may know me from the last day, well and good. For those of you that don't, my name is Diarmuid Murphy. As Sandra said, I'm a area manager with Germinal, covering predominantly the northeast and west of the country. And yeah, I'm just going to speak to you tonight for the next hour or so about grazing brassica crops. Yeah, so that's it. We'll get things kicked off.
Lovely. Okay. Thanks a million, Diarmuid.
Oh, perfect. Why brassica crops? Okay, so a lot of brassica crops they're obviously in the ground now at this stage, but just as I say, there's some people who may be listening in tonight that haven't brassica crops in the ground and are hoping to perhaps sow them next year. So I'm just going to quickly go over why you would choose to put in a brassica crop. Okay.
Great.
So first point, forage self-sufficiency. In simple English, to produce more forage. There's a lot of farmers out there, livestock farmers, be they suckler farmers, be they beef, be they dairy, that are purchasing feed, be it in the form of additional silage or be it in the form of concentrate. So by producing your own feed, well, sure, it's better than paying somebody else at the end of the day. If you can produce it, it saves you paying someone else to do it.
Exactly.
Part of your reseeding policy. So you remember years ago, Sandra, going back to the 70s and 80s, all our fathers and our grandfathers, they used to practice crop rotation. They used to have a little bit of spring barley, for example. They might have had a few spuds. They might have had, obviously, they had grass, and then they would put in the likes of a kale or a rape or a stubble turnip to outwinter their animals on. So it's part of a crop rotation or reseeding policy. Reduce feed deficits, yeah, be it in summer, tends to be something like stubble turnips. Autumn or winter, you can use your rapes, your Redstarts, your kales.
Very good.
Yeah. Drought 2018 and maybe even 2020. Yeah. 2018 is not that long ago, and our sales in that year, and I'm sure everybody else's sales were something similar, but our sales in 2018 literally doubled. It's because, as you well know, Sandra, the weather didn't take up till August, into August,
yeah.
And for the previous months there was no growth whatsoever. So people were panicking. They were wanting to extend their grazing season. They didn't have sufficient stocks in the pit or in the bales or whatever. So literally the sales of brassica crops in 2018 went through the roof. And
there might have been people that, that put them in at that stage under pressure because they were short of fodder, and they mightn't have been as au fait with it. And this might be a chance, as you say, planning again, possibly for 2021, they could, put them in again, and a more planned approach, I suppose.
Yeah, I think 2018 was a learning curve for a lot of people, and perhaps even maybe a steep learning curve, which are here.
Very steep.
Yeah, so as a winter feed to be grazed in situ, to enhance production at grass, because this is something I was speaking to you about previous, Sandra, what you call it, all the anecdotal evidence coming back from farmers, they would say that any batch of animals that they have after being outwintered on a crop of, let's say, kale, let's say rape, let's say Redstart, when they go back to grass or they go on to grass the following spring, right, the following February or March, they'll literally hit the ground running. And as I say, I know it's something that you came across yourself, so they just
100%. Have yet to see an animal go backwards.
Yes.
From going from the brassica crop to grass in spring. Unbelievable transition.
It's going back to, again, what our fathers and grandfathers do, as in there was a lot more animals outwintered back then. And sure, there's a lot of people out there that believe animals are 100% healthier outdoors. And sure, there's definitely, they're definitely right. They're definitely correct.
It's definitely, as we'll see going through your presentation, it's something I definitely concur with. And I know people give out about, you know, restrictions and cross compliance and that, but brassica crops can fit in with the system that we have at the moment.
Absolutely.
You know, it is part of it.
Yeah. So they'll help to reduce your costs in terms of your labor, in terms of your machinery, housing. They'll help to increase capacity without additional capital outlay. What I mean by that is there's a lot of farmers in recent times have been, for example, right, dairy farmers, for example, since 2014, the abolition of quotas, they've been trying to expand, right? So therefore, when they were, let's say, building their extra housing capacity, they might have put in a kale or a rape to essentially carry those animals outside for a couple of months until their housing requirements were fulfilled. So they're a great way to increase your capacity without necessarily huge outlay.
We'd often get asked questions just on that point there. You know, can I outwinter? And as I said in my previous point, 100% yes, you can outwinter. And if it came to Christmas week and you had to stock out on kale or rape or stubble turnips, they're not causing any damage, poaching or overgrazing or anything like that, or liquefaction of the soil. You can still have them out. The only thing is with certain farmers, if they're stocked very heavily, and what I mean by that is stocked above the organic nitrogen stocking rate of 140 kgs of organic nitrogen, they need to have housing for those animals that they have outdoors present. They're just not using them. It is a different story for those if they're stocked under the 170. There is an allowance for outwintering, but for heavier stock farms, they can have the animals out causing no damage, but just they have to keep in mind that they have to have the accommodation available if and when something like a disaster happened, like continuous wet weather, and they had to house, that they would have it available.
Yes, absolutely. And the final point, to improve the soil health. You and I covered soil health and soil.
That's a very big one.
That's a huge one. We said the last day that one of the best ways or one of the quickest ways to improve your soil health and your soil fertility is to build organic matter. How do you do that? Through the application of farm manure, slurry. So if you have animals literally being outwintered, they're defecating, they're urining, they're producing organic matter. You also have, if you so any brassica crop, kale, rape, swedes, turnips, you will utilize 85, maybe 90% of them, but there's still going to be some bit left behind that you're unable to utilize, and that's green manure. So between the urine, between the defecating, the green manure, it's a great way to improve your soil fertility and your soil health.
Yeah, great.
Okay. This is just a graph that explains the difference between grass growth and brassica growth. So it's great. You can see that the bars in green are the grass growth, while the bars in lilac or purple are the brassica growth. Typical grass growth throughout the year. So you can see that brassica ties into the system perfectly, because in April, May, June, July, let's say they're your top months for your grass growth. Okay, and then it begins to dip in August, September, October, November. And from August, September, October, November, your brassica crop, on the other hand, that's when it comes into its own. So you can see that there's just there's a nice symbiotic relationship between the two. They work well together, in simple English. You know.
Yeah, and it's like, I'm very used to looking at the grass curve. It's nice to see something overlay it. The only month you're missing is March.
Yeah.
You know.
But as you say, it's a popular question. We'd often come across guys in other years, not this year, at the Tullamore show and the likes, or when we could do shows, and they'd say, what can I sow, what do you call it, that'll grow into August, September, October, when the grass basically stops. So yeah, as I say, brassicas are great, what do you call it, they will continue to produce October, November, December, they will. As I say, they may not necessarily...
Yeah, very interesting slide, that one there.
Yeah. They may not visibly, what you got to increase in that to look at them. You mightn't think they're after growing a huge amount over those months, but the dry matter content will increase, and therefore there's more yield there.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, it's no accident that I'm going to start with this slide. It's just from a cross compliance point of view. It's extremely important when you're out wintering animals. You need to tick this box. You need to get this right. Okay.
Okay.
So what do I need to do from a cross compliance point of view? I need to have good animal health. So only animals that are fit and healthy should be considered for out wintering. Any animal that's in any way delicate or any way sick shouldn't be out winter, shouldn't be considered. And basically you should prioritize your indoor housing for the likes of those animals and give them a little bit of extra TLC. So your smaller animals or your sick animals.
Yeah.
Okay, protection of soil. Yeah, there's a perfect picture to illustrate what you don't want to do on the left hand side. So we just
should be a big X through that.
Correct. So we just spoke about the benefits of a brassica crop in terms of building your soil health and your soil fertility. Well, any benefit that you get from having a brassica crop would be completely negated or nullified by allowing the likes of this to happen. Yeah, you shouldn't do that. You got it. So ideally, no tractors going out into the land during the winter months. Now that doesn't always happen, and we'll come on to that in future slides. But if you could just certainly minimize the amount of machinery going out into the land during the winter months.
But sure, if that happens, you're losing nutrients, and you're also losing, the good soil particles as well. They're being liquefied, they're flown away from that area.
Yeah, you were saying what you came across a couple of years ago where someone's soil turned to almost complete liquid. Is that right?
Yeah. Luckily enough, it wasn't on a roadside field, but it broke through the hedge, liquefied after heavy rain, and it was prolonged heavy rain, and flowed across a field and out. Literally, it found the path of least resistance and ended up out onto the road. Once I copped it, I contacted the relevant farmer, and it got sorted. But wouldn't have thought it'd been an issue because there was no steep terrain. It was relatively what I would call flat terrain. But it just showed what could happen, and once again, the farmer did relate, a lot of driving through it, and that is your picture there on the left hand side, 10 times worse. So minimize the amount of machinery, and I know you have a slide to show that later on in your presentation.
Absolutely, yeah. And as I say, not only are you losing your benefits, but I'd say you'd lose your neighbours too, because but my wife just always give out what they got her driving down. So we live out in the country, and she's driving down the road, and what they call it, the car is actually washed and it was lovely and clean. The next thing is covered in muck and dirt and whatever from the local farmer, but she never thanks them, and I can tell you that for nothing.
So protect your soils and don't deny the neighbours.
Yeah, exactly. Protection of waterways. So again, wherever brassica crops go in, where they're anywhere near waterways, those waterways can be subject to soil erosion through poaching and through destabling of riverbanks, for example. So what they recommend is where you're putting them in anywhere near a waterway, that you should leave a buffer, as in leave an uncultivated area not sown down to your brassica crop. And fence off your waterway as well. So it's an insurance policy, because the last thing you want is
exactly, and the bigger the better.
Yeah, exactly. So select the appropriate fields, ensure no runoff. We said that. Stock class and rate. So same as when you're batching any animals together, make sure that you're putting like with like. Provide a run back area. So I'll cover these in more detail now in the next couple of slides. But provide a run back area and provide shelter. And when I say shelter, it doesn't have to be housing, what you call it, but it needs to be some form of natural shelter. So say, for example, it's a field you're sowing down to brassica on an out farm, and as I say, there's no sheds or there's no, but just make sure that there's some form of natural shelter there. Shift stock daily, that'll help to maximize your utilization. And as I say, in an ideal world, no tractors in the field during the winter months.
Okay.
As I say, if you can tick that cross compliance box, you're halfway through having a successful outwintering on brassicas.
Exactly. Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Yeah, and this is just a slide I came across, but I thought it was a good one. It just basically the reason I put this in, I just want to point out that Big Brother is always watching. So even if you have a big ditch on the left hand side and you think that there's nobody can see what's going on behind that ditch, and if it's getting very mucky, I think, oh, it's grand, I'll get away with it. You won't. You'll always get caught. So just make sure, as I say, tick the cross compliance box, and just good practice, basically practice.
Exactly. Or the big stork will get you.
Yeah, exactly. Because if you choose the correct field, as in it's free draining soil, and there's absolutely no ill effects whatsoever. Because people often ask us, "What do you got? God, will I do harm by having animals out on it over the winter if the weather turns bad?" But if you select appropriate field and you manage it correctly, as in you move your stock every day and you give them a fresh allocation, you will not do any harm whatsoever to the soil health. As I say, you're going to improve it, both your soil health and your soil fertility. Like these three pictures, or particularly the picture on the bottom left-hand side and the picture on the right-hand side, you can see that they're perfectly healthy soils. There's no signs of any horizontal layers. There's no discolored areas. There's no visible signs of any compaction. So yeah, and as I say, the soil aggregates are quite small, quite friable. That's exactly what you want. So as I say, please don't be worried that you're going to do any damage. As if you choose an appropriate field, it's going to do nothing, only the world of good.
That's great.
Okay. Okay, so moving on to a crop selection. So the main crops, and what I say the main crops is when you're putting in a crop and it's going in as your main crop for that calendar year. So the likes of your kale, likes of your Swedes, but they typically go in May, June, and certainly they'd want to be in by the early July, okay? And then you graze them over the autumn and the winter months. While your secondary crops, and what I mean by secondary crops, there's a lot of rapes and a lot of Redstarts and various other hybrids would typically go in after winter barley, for example, or winter wheat, or some guys would even put it in after spring barley. So they tend to go in the months of July and August, and some even early September. So I say your main, if you're going with a brassica as your main crop, try to get it in May and June, certainly early July. If it's not going in as a main crop, it's going in as a secondary crop, well, then you have a little bit more of a window of opportunity. So July, August, early September.
Okay, so just to clarify, I know when I'm filling in the basic payment forms, what we judge is whatever is going to be the crop as on the 31st of May is what we enter into the system. So if Swedes are already in, or the kale, we'd put down that for the farmer. As I said, with the stubble turnips and the rape and the hybrids, they'll go in after a crop of barley. So the basic payment won't say rape or Redstart. It'll say winter barley, or winter wheat, or winter spring, winter oats as well.
Yes, that's exactly it. That's it.
That's grand.
Okay. So just a little bit more on crop selection, and you'll see a picture paints 1,000 words. You'll see the picture on the left hand side, and this is a picture of two different hybrids, and you can just see that the hybrid on the left hand side is clearly being grazed down lower than the hybrid on the right hand side. So as I say, it's like anything. It's like grasses. It's like meal. It's like anything. There's no two, as in. You need to select for quality. So and when I say select for quality, in the case of hybrids, you select for a superior leaf to stem ratio, because that's, if you're selecting for leaf is where the quality is. So as I say, you have your leaf and your stem, right? And essentially your stem is mostly lignin, which is used to support the plant to make it stand up, right? But your leaf, that's where your actual feed value is. So your energy and your protein. Brassica crops are high in both of those, both energy and protein, and that's contained within the leaf. So if you select a crop, you should select for a superior leaf to stem ratio, because as I say, that's
okay. So somebody then that is putting it in, to feed ewes or lambs, finishing lambs, or weaning heifers. But then if somebody came to you and was putting it in for a crop, let's say for wild bird cover or something like that.
Perfect example.
Be a totally different variety they'd be looking for.
Yeah, because in the UK, what do you call it? Our game cover crops are quite popular, as in
I've seen those.
Yeah, over there, there's a lot bigger market for them. Yeah. And there's kales and rapes that are selected for their game cover characteristics, while we would any kales or rapes that we would put in, we'd be selecting for their fodder characteristics, as in their feeding value. So just make sure what they call it, that if you're putting in a kale or rape, make sure that's a fodder kale or a fodder rape, and make sure that it has a good leaf to stem ratio, because the feed value, I assure you, is in the leaf, not in the stem. The stem is essentially like the leg of this table here.
Perfect.
Also select for vigorous early growth, because at the end of the day you want it to get out of the ground running, particularly, or hit the ground running I should say, particularly when it's going in after our winter barleys or our winter wheats or our spring barleys. You want it to get off to a good start. Resistant to lodging. I actually came across a crop this year that had completely lodged. Now, as it happened, the farmer in question, he was after going at too much nitrogen at one stage, and next thing is we got just a shot of rain and weather took up. And as I said, it was just a burst of growth, and it ended up going down completely. And the problem is, it'll rot into the ground. It's like anything once if it lodges. And this was early in the year.
That would be a rare occurrence, though, Dermot, wouldn't it?
To be fair, I've never seen it until this year.
I've never seen it.
Yeah, no, this year was my first ever year to see it. But as I say, I did see it this year up in Roscommon. As I say, I think it just went with too much nitrogen, one application, and it just, bad luck. But as I say, if you can select for resistance to lodging, great. You need to be winter hardy. So, for example, kale is your most winter hardy crop. You can choose of the kale, rapes, weeds, turnips. Kale is the most winter hardy. And the last thing you should select for is a long utilization period in animal performance. What I mean by that is, for example, kale, you can graze kale, you can begin grazing kale now in November, and you can literally graze it right through until next February. We'd say ideally, if you can have them finished grazing by the end of February, certainly the early days of March. But that gives you a long utilization period. Yeah,
because it starts to flower after that, doesn't it?
Correct. It goes to typically we beginning of March or around Patrick's Day. It all depends on the weather, what you call it. But as soon as the weather conditions begin to turn mild, brassicas can go to seed, go to flower, and when that happens, they're poisonous. So no, it's an absolute disaster.
Okay. Okay. Very good.
That's absolutely. This is just a picture of a couple.
No, I have a question in, but I'm going to wait until we come to it's on Redstart, so we'll wait till we come to that. Okay.
So anyone that's listening tonight, probably the most popular brassicas that are in the ground. Well, back in the summer months, what they call it, it's probably not too much of it in the ground now, will be the likes of your Appin, your Appin, your type, and they're your stubble turnips, right? The one thing I would say on the likes of stubble turnips is, they're not always put on. A lot of brassicas are sown on their own, right? They're sown as a monoculture, so they go in literally on their own. So be it a rape, be it a Redstart or whatever. But there is an option out there, what they call it, to include them with grass, and that's it's certainly the case with Redstart, and it's probably even more so popular, what you got it, with the likes of your Appin stubble turnips. There's a lot of farmers, like, as I say, I cover the northeast and west, and if you go up around Mead, what you got it, there's just an area up there where there's a lot of sheep farmers, and they would put in the likes of stubble turnips, right, along with their grass every year. So they use the brassica as part of their reseeding program, but they don't put it in on its own, as in it goes in. They might sow 14 kgs to the acre, and it could be 12.5 or 13 kgs of that 14 could be grass, and 1 kg or 1.5 kg could be their stubble turnip. And the idea is that they will get 3 grazings or 4 grazing out of the stubble turnip, and then they're left with a crop of grass. So that, for example,
and what time of the year would they be putting that in to get the 3 grazings?
That will go in early. They would be sowing that May, June.
Okay.
So they will be putting it in along with the grass. They will get 3, as I say, or 4 grazings out of the stubble turnip, and then next spring they have a crop of grass. So compare that to somebody, if you put in, for example, kale in the month of May or the month of June, and you graze that November, December, January, February, well, obviously you have to turn around the following spring and reseed it. But as I say, if you put in the likes of your Redstart or your Appin stubble turnips along with the grass, you'll get the benefit. You'll get the short-term benefit of that, and you'll get the long-term benefit of your reseed.
Okay, great, good to know.
Yeah, just something to bear in mind.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, as I say, this was definitely the most popular hybrid in the country in 2018. As I say, this is the one, literally our sales of this doubled. And as I said, because it just tied into when the weather took up, as I say, August, September, that was the time, and that was the time that all the Redstart went into the ground. And yeah, it's still a very popular hybrid because it has the highest leaf to stem ratio on the market. And as I say, the quality is in the leaf, it's not in the stem. Yeah.
Okay, I have a question for you on that, Dermot, right? Sean asks, he sowed Redstart in mid-August for the first time. Okay. It has grown well. He hopes to start strip grazing it soon. It's up to his knee when he walked it there now. Okay. What height would you deem to be a good crop? Because Sean is just saying it's his first time growing it, so he's never kind of gone through the whole process.
Well, so, if it's only in like Redstart would typically go in from, as I say, the 1st or the 15th of July. I'd say the majority, right? Okay. From our point of view, there's kind of two markets from Redstart. There is some people that would sow Redstart quite early in the year, and they would put it in with, we just mentioned it, put it in with their grass. Okay, so they might only the sowing rate of Redstart is 4 kgs to the acre. Okay, so they might put it in at 1 or 1.5 kgs with their grass, right? So there's a certain amount of people or cohort of people that do that, right? There's then another cohort of people that put in Redstart on its own, right, in May and June. Yeah. And Redstart and rape have the ability to regrow, okay? Kale, for example, doesn't. Okay. So you can get one grazing out of kale. Redstart or stego rape, you can get 2 grazings, you can even get 3 grazings, right? So there's a certain cohort of people out there that put it in May and June. Sheep guys, for example, and they will graze it multiple times, right? So rather than getting one bulky grazing over the winter months, they take 2 smaller grazings, right? And then you
so
have
Sean's case then in mid-August.
Yeah. So then there's as I say, the last cohort of people that sow later, which is July and August, and typically they're only going to get 1 grazing. So the likes of Sean, he's just going to get 1 grazing now, because if he grazes it now in the month of November, it's not going to grow back because temperatures are the way they are. But as I say, is it a good crop? If it's only sown since the middle of August, as I say, a lot of the Redstart will go in maybe a month earlier. So if it's gone into the middle of August and it's above his knee, it's definitely a good crop. But if he's asking, should he go into it now? I'd say go into it, not without giving him a smart understand. I'd say go into it when it suits him. If he's animals that are still out now this minute, right, and he hasn't been brought in, and it suits them from a practicality point of view to go in and start grazing that tomorrow morning on the 13th of November, absolutely perfect. It's not going to grow a huge amount more, what do you call it, between now and the end of the year. So if it suits him now, what do you call it, absolutely go into it then. If it doesn't suit him now, if it suits him in another 2 or 3 weeks, what do you call it, if he still has a bit of grass and he's on good dry ground, as I say, the longer he leaves it, the better, because visibly to look at it, it mightn't look like it's increasing in yield, but the dry matter percentage will be going up. So if you can leave it a bit longer, great. If you can't, if it suits him to go in tomorrow morning, I'd say fire away, no problem.
We have another one on the Redstart. Kieran is 0 grazing Redstart in January, February for his dairy cows.
Yes.
Rate of feeding with silage. And what crop with the highest output would he recommend to set in March to have to cut by the end of July?
So could you say that to me again? That way he's wondering what crop?
The second question is, what crop with the highest output would you recommend?
Okay, if you don't mind, Sandra, if you could get the first part of the question again, please. Sorry.
Oh yeah, he's going 0 grazing Redstart in January, February for his dairy cows.
Yes.
Rate of feeding with silage, and I think you're going to cover that now in slides, the 30%. Yeah,
well, that's the fibre. They say if you're feeding a brassica crop with silage, no more than 20%. They say a brassica crop, and it's from a milk taint point of view. It's actually so there's no problem at all with grazing dairy cows on it, absolutely 0. But to say don't go over 20% in that scenario, 20% brassica, right, and 80% just silage on your straw, what do you call it, your alternative. But yeah, don't go any higher than 20% brassica, and that's from a milk taint point of view.
Okay.
The only other thing I would say is remember that Redstart, or sorry, any hybrid or any brassica, I should say, is a very high energy feed. So just bear that in mind. What do you call it? As in, you just want to, when you're putting together, you're composing your diet, just bear in mind that the brassica is going to be very high in energy and very high in protein.
Yeah.
Okay, that's the first part of your question.
Just to recommend Kieran, I know we do the likes of, we have a program that you can put in that element to kind of see what the whole diet would come out of if he'd, you know, silage or he'd grass or if he'd meal as well. Yeah.
Yes, ideal.
And the second question was with Kieran was, what crop with the highest output would you recommend to set in March to have cut by the end of July?
Well, there's no real brassicas go in the month of March, I'd say. Most brassicas will go in from May onwards, and the reason why you wouldn't, so the likes of your, which is not a brassica, right, that might go in February, March, but no, what do you call it, to be no kale, rape, swedes, turnips, they typically wouldn't go into the ground until May. You'd be afraid of frost. You couldn't go in as early as what you got it as March or April, but May, certainly from May onwards. And the highest crop, as I say, so the highest crop will be kale in terms of yield. So May, June, from our perspective, or from a Germinal perspective, we would say May, June, and early July tends to be predominantly your kale, and it tends to be your swedes, right? Now, if he's hoping to zero graze it or graze it, you're not going to be putting in a swede. So you're looking at that time of the year, you're looking at kale. And then, as I say, May to June. And then when it comes in July, August, September, then you're looking at your red starts and your rapes.
Okay. So we have a couple of more questions on that, Diarmuid, right? But I'm going to hold them at the moment, okay? No problem. And maybe go on a couple of slides and we'll come back. I think some of them are going to tie into some of the stuff that you're going to cover now anyway, okay?
Very good, very good. So this is your kale. This is an example of your kale. So as I say, it's the highest yielding, most winter hardy. I'd say up until recent years, definitely the most popular hybrid or the most popular brassica out there would have been kale. Okay, so just a little bit in terms of the yield and ME and the crude protein, what you can expect of the various crops. So stego fodder rape, in terms of yield, you're looking at a typical yield of 6 to 8 tons of dry matter per hectare. An ME of 10 to 11. So in terms of energy, very good.
Very good energy, yeah.
Yeah, crude protein, your rapes and your Redstart are probably the highest. You're looking at your 18 to 20% crude protein. They're very good for going in after your winter barleys and your winter wheat, and the reason why is the very fast, vigorous growth. And also, we alluded to it already in previous slides that both your rapes and your Redstart have the ability to regrow. So they don't just have to go in late in the year. They can go in as early as kale. They can go in the months of May. The only thing is, if you're going in that early in the year, you need to graze them once or cut them once. You wouldn't put it in that early and not hope to feed it until the back end of the year.
Not cut it, yes, or graze it, yeah.
Yes, perfect. Yeah, that's exactly it. It has a very high leaf to stem ratio, so it's a good fodder rape. Tried and tested. Excellent whole plant feed value. In other words, you'll graze it right down to the ground, and as I say, it has the ability to be multi-grazed. So that's just a little bit of their Figo. Hybrid. So that's your Redstart. So higher yielding. Just what I mean. What I mean by Redstart being a hybrid, it's a cross, right, between rape and kale. And the idea of it is that it has the early maturity of rape, so gets out of the ground very early, but you got it and gets going.
Okay.
And it has the winter hardiness of kale. So that's the idea of
kale.
that. Yes, and that's the idea of that particular hybrid Redstart. And as I say, it's by far and above the most popular one. In terms of its yield, 6 to 8 tons of dry matter per hectare. Again, similar ME and crude protein to your rape. It has
high energy crop.
Yeah, exactly. High energy, high protein. 100 to 110 days to maturity. Because it's a hybrid, it's like any hybrid. It's got a bit of vigor, so it'll get out of the ground very quickly. And that's why it was used in 2018 when people were under pressure and wanting to basically build stocks quickly. It has the highest leaf to stem ratio on the market, and it's winter hardy. As I say, it gets that winter hardness from its kale characteristics. Very flexible, tends to be used for summer, autumn, or winter feed, and again, possible to multi-graze. Okay.
Maybe we'll take before you move on to I know there's some more questions on that. We'll just go to them. Tim asks, how late into the spring can you graze Redstart? It was set, Tim's crop was set in the middle of July. Is that back to the flowering, is it, Dermot?
Correct, right. I'd be trying, right? I'm going to give two answers, Sandra, right? I'm going to give you an official answer and an unofficial answer, right?
That's like a politician, Dermot, now.
Yeah, well, yeah, I don't, that can't be good. That can't be good. But no, right? We would always say you should try to have your brassica crop grazed by the end of February, beginning of March, right? So that's when you want it, because
Okay.
any time after that, there is a risk of it going to flower. Okay, so that is in theory what by the end of February, beginning of March, have that crop grazed. In 2018, there was a lot of those crops began to flower, what do you call it, the following spring. And guys may have ended up grazing them just for a couple of days. They might have had maybe an acre left, or just a little bit left that was beginning to go to flower. And if those animals were after being on it, Sandra, for the previous months, right, as in the previous 3 or 4 months, well, we had, as I say, theory is we'd say get them off. Practice was, if it was only a very small bit, and as I say, those animals were on it and they were accustomed and they were acclimatized to it. If it was only a little bit, they would have got away with it. But as I say, it would only if it was gone to flower, that percentage, and you were grazing it, that percentage of the diet would want to be that brassica percentage of the diet would want to be very small. As in, you wouldn't want to be feeding an 80% or 90% of a brassica that's gone to flower. I would increase my silage, I would increase my straw, I would do whatever. I would just increase the fiber content and just go monitor them closely and work your way through it very slowly. As I say, if it was only a small piece of ground, if there was a large piece of ground still to be grazed, unfortunately, you'd have to tell them, plow it in. You have to walk away. And as I say, whatever you do, the biggest no-no ever is don't bring in new stock in that scenario, Sandra, because new stock wouldn't be acclimatizing to it, wouldn't be accustomed to it. It would be an absolute disaster. You know, so
great point.
To answer your question, try to have it gone by the end of February, what they call it, beginning of March. That's what I would do. It's only worst case scenario, you might end up grazing a very small bit. But if I was trying to put a plan in place, I'd be planning to get it grazed again that time and then return to grass.
Okay. Question from Philip here on fencing for strip grazing.
Okay.
What is the most convenient way to strip graze sheep? Do you pre-mow a path, or what other methods are used? What have you seen out on the ground, Dermot, for that one?
I'd say there's nobody pre-mowing, what do you call it? Your typical sheep man is going with the likes of your Redstart, or they're going with the likes of your stubble turnips, your Appin stubble turnips, or your Stego rapes. And no, there's no, you strip graze, what do you call it? Yeah, so I suppose typically I'll give you a 10-acre field and you divide it into 4 batches, right? So you have your 1, 2, 3, 4, right? And guys strip graze. So they put the stock into, let's say, paddock number 1, right? Then, for example, leave them a week, leave them 10 days to graze that, right? Then they move them on to paddock number 2, right? The most important thing in that scenario is that you use
rotational grazing.
Correct, exactly. And by the time they get around to they've number 4 paddock, or number 4, paddock essentially grazed, well then perhaps 4 weeks or 40 days is after passing. So paddock 1 is ready to be grazed again. So as I say, just rotational graze. The most important thing to bear in mind in that situation is to use a back fence, number 1, because if you don't use a back fence, they will automatically go back and graze the lovely little fresh regrowth, and that's just not what you want. You want them to be regrowth. You don't want them going back nibbling at and cutting it off at the stem. And the other thing is, as soon as they go over, for example, paddock 1 and they move on to paddock 2, as I say, put up your back fence and come in and spread your fertilizer. So a little bit of compound, something with a P and K, in order to get the growth, get the subsequent growth going. Yeah, but rotational graze, I'd say there's no need to pre-mow whatsoever. That's only adding expense and adding work. No need.
Okay, I think we've kind of answered this one, but just to be sure, anonymous attendee then, can sheep be grazed solely on the brassica, or do they need a grass run back? I'm thinking of separating, doing it for weaned lambs and outwintering ewes, so that he's going to have 2 different groups.
Well, right, it's always advisable, and we will cover it in the next couple of slides in more detail. It is always advisable and recommended to have a lie back area. And it's always advised, or a run back area, it's always advisable that a brassica crop should be no more than 80% of an animal's diet, be it sheep, be it a cattle, be it a dairy, or whatever the case may be, no more. Have I come across animals that have consumed 100% brassica? Yes, I think there was a trial done in Moore Park, if I'm not mistaken, years ago by Emer Kennedy, where animals, I think it was heifers or bullocks, I'm not sure, but they were definitely outwintered on 100% kale with no ill effects, right? As I say,
Right,
it's
okay.
right. It can be done. There's absolutely no issue. But the only thing I would say in that situation is you'd want to let them acclimatize or accustom to it very slowly, right? Because it's new diet, it's completely new diet. It's high in energy, high in protein, what do you call it? So allow them to acclimatize to it very slowly, build them up gradually. And as I say, can it be done? Yes. Is it advisable? No. Right. So to say 80% max you should go to. Have people gone with 90% and 100%? Yes, they have. But I'd say go with the safe bet, what do you call it? If it was me, I'd go with 80, maybe 90%. I'd still have a little bit of fibre in the diet because they'll regulate themselves then. I just have it available, Sandra.
Okay.
That's probably the most practical advice I can have to that person. Have the fibre available. If they end up getting a taste for the same as you or I, or anyone will get a taste for something, and if you like it,
it's like too much chocolate.
Yeah, and you'll stay eating you'll stay eating the chocolate. But if there's chocolate and potatoes there, well then occasionally you might go for the potatoes instead of chocolate. But to say,
we have that's great. We have a few more questions. What we'll do is I'll let you go on with a couple more slides there, Dermot, and we'll come back to the rest of the questions. Okay.
Yeah, no problem. So Mara's kestrel, in terms of what sort of a yield could you expect if it's in the ground now, if you haven't sown? As I say, since May, June, it's the highest yielding crop. You're looking at 10 to 12 tons of dry matter per hectare. I will come on to it in case you have any questions coming up. I will come on to it in a few minutes, Sandra, how to measure a crop to ascertain whether it's
great,
12 tons, whatever the case may be. You're looking at a higher ME in terms of your feed value, 12 to 13. And crude protein 16 to 18. As we said, or as we alluded to already, it has a long utilization period. Kale can be grazed from November right through until next February. You'll also graze 85-90%. You'll get 85-90% utilization. That leads back to the point that we were saying earlier on, that there's some kales out there that are bred for game cover, and because they're bred for game cover, they're producing a great amount of stalk or a very great amount of stem and very little leaf, and therefore you're not going to get your 85-90% utilization. You're going to be left with that picture we showed a couple of slides back. You're going to be left with 6, 8, 10 inches left behind. And at the end of the day, okay, it's grand from a green manure point of view, but it's of no feed value to your animals. So
the Mars kestrel now would be the one that I'd be most familiar with, and I know it's high energy, high protein, and as I say, the utilization in some fields you wouldn't even know that it had been grazed. They get right down to the bone of it, and it's so palatable to the animal. They really, really like it, and they thrive really, really well on it.
Yeah, but see, that's the difference, because it's not all about yield, what do you call it, and it's just that's what we'd be trying to get through. Well, that's what we just like. Yeah, it's just that's what you'd be trying to explain, is that it's not just about producing tonnage, because your game cover kales and your game cover crops, they'll produce more tonnage, what do you call it, because they're designed to grow seriously tall, what do you call it, from a game cover point of view. But there's no feed value in it. And at the end of the day, to feed, you want the energy, you want the protein. That's why you're putting them into the ground.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Very good.
Tolerates hard winters, and it's resistant to lodging. Okay, so just the last one, as not too much stubble turnips going to be in the ground now. Most of them will be grazed, because stubble turnips, a lot of it goes in, from our point of view, we would say, as I say, it goes in with grass, or else it tends to be a little bit earlier in the year, and it will be, most of it will be grazed by now. But in terms of what you could expect if you were thinking about doing it next year, something in terms of 4 to 6 ton in terms of a dry matter per hectare, similar ME and similar protein to your rapes. That's the big benefit of a stubble turnip, is that it's very quick to mature, very early maturing, so you can graze it after 8 weeks. So your question a couple of slides ago about strip or rotational grazing your stubble turnips, what some guys do is if they were hoping to graze it, right, if it's ready to be grazed after 8 weeks, so say they might go into block A after maybe 6 weeks, Sandra, after maybe 7 weeks, right? So that the idea is that they want to try get around, if they have their 10-acre field and it's divided into A, B, C, D, well, they might be going into A after 6 weeks, for example. So it might be a little bit early, right? But by the time you get around to D, it's not gone too strong or too late. Do you know what I mean? Well, if they left it 8 or 9 weeks before they go into A, well, by the time they get around to D, D has gone extremely strong. Do you know what I mean? It's getting ahead of them.
I understand.
Yeah. Very flexible. So yeah, it can be used as a summer or autumn feed. It's drought tolerant, and again, possible, as I say, to multi-graze. You'll get 3 or 4 grazings out of a stubble turnip, no problem at all, once it goes into it good and early in the year. Okay, this is just a trial that was done back in 2018, so the year of the drought. And basically, after 12 weeks growth, they measured how high yielding the various crops were. Okay, and basically it showed that Redstart after 12 weeks had reached 4.4 tons of dry matter per hectare. Right. The only thing the only thing to point out on this is that on a fresh basis, right, on a fresh weight basis, Redstart wasn't the highest yielding. I think it was Swifter, but it wasn't the highest yielding. Sorry, Redstart wasn't the highest yielding on a fresh weight basis. But when they took their dry matter samples and they went away and measured their yield, then it came out. It turned out that Redstart was the highest yielding after 12 weeks. But I say, that was it. And then regrowth. So this was another trial that they did, and basically it was Redstart that had been sown as early as June. Okay, and it was first grazed in September, right? And then they allowed regrow, right? And they grazed it again on the 29th of November. Okay, so they got 2 grazings out of it, right? And what they found on the second grazing is that the stem had thickened significantly, right? But the crop remained short. But the top, as in the stem remained short, but the top growth was far leafier. And there was plenty of top growth. So yeah,
that's great.
Yeah, exactly. So it has the ability to regrow, to come back a second time. And they went to
say the crop that keeps on giving.
Yeah, exactly. So and they went and they measured the leaf regrowth, and they got it tested, as I say, for ME, and they got it tested for protein. And as you can see, the protein or the feed value goes back to what we were saying. The energy and the protein is in the leaf, right? So if you look at the protein of your leaf, right, for example, it's 24%, right? Compare that to the protein of your stem, which is 11.5%. So as I say, this is why you need to choose brassicas with the highest leaf to stem ratio, because that is where your feed is. And even from an energy one.
Yeah, that's something that's very important, because like your lambs, they're growing, your weaning heifers or weaning, bulls or whatever you decide to put on it, they're growing. And people have to remember that protein is extremely important, as much as it's important in your grass diet, right? We kind of take it as a given because grass has, over 20% crude protein. And you need that in your winter diet. And a lot of silages would be poor in crude protein, whereas the likes of the kale and the Redstart are high in protein. So hence, you're putting an animal on a crop like that kind of over the winter time that needs to grow frame, size. You don't want it to get fat. You want it to grow, bone. And the only way to do that is to make sure there's plenty of crude protein in the diet. And this is why your point earlier, that the transition from the kale or the Redstart to grass then in February or March is, so seamless, because they're still growing. You haven't adjusted the crude protein in their diet.
Exactly. That's exactly it. In a nutshell, you have it in one. That's exactly it. So as I say, just the final part of the trial was that they measure the total dry matter yield in November. So bear in mind, this was the second grazing. It was sown in June, right? And grazed, as I say, firstly, and then it was grazed again in November. And even on the second grazing, it got over 4.5 tons that late in the year. So if you've got something similar to the first grazing, there's where your 9-10 tons of dry matter is coming from in Redstart.
Okay, very good.
Okay, so now we're getting down to the bones of it, right?
Okay.
The actual grazing of them, the do's and don'ts, okay?
We might just go through your measurement and then we'll take a couple of more questions, Dermot.
No problem, no problem. I just have 1 or 2 slides first and then I'll come on. Well, yeah, okay.
No, keep going. Yeah.
Perfect, and we will come to measuring it. So just hopefully now at this stage, Sandra, the horse is bolted, so if it's not in a suitable field, I can't do anything about it, right?
That's all right.
Ideally, it should be a suitable field, as in what I mean by that is a field that is in need of reseeding, hasn't been performing for the last couple of years, or it may have been in tillage, it may have been whatever, but just a field that will benefit from a break crop, right? It needs to be free draining, fertile soil, so your pH needs to be a 6.5, P's and K's need to be in index 3. No threat to water courses. If there is a threat, as I say, have a uncultivated strip, have it fenced. Do not allow stock near to a river or stream. It needs to be 5 years at least since the last brassica crop was there, and it needs to provide natural shelter. And ideally, you should we say avoid very steep sloping fields. So back to your point, Sandra, where the soil literally became liquid because, as I say, weather turned bad and it was on the side of a hill. That'll happen. So avoid very steep sloping fields. Okay. In terms of feeding systems, so we say feed as a balanced diet to achieve optimum results. So 70-30, so 30% fiber, what do you call it? Certainly 20% fiber, but ideally we say 30% fiber.
Okay.
And ensure a good fresh water supply. So even they are brassica crops, any brassica crop is 85+% water. What you got in terms of the dry matter is typically 10 to 14, 15%. So there is a lot of water. What you got, but however, I would still always have access to a fresh water.
Yeah,
same principle
definitely.
As the fiber source, they'll regulate themselves. If they choose not to drink the water, no problem, but have it available. Allow a run back area. It's always best practice. In terms of the fiber, we say hay, straw or silage, 30%. And also we say what you call it, feed minerals. And I say I'll cover the fiber and I'll cover the minerals aspect in a little bit more detail now in a second.
Okay.
Okay. So do not allow unrestricted access. So introduce stock over 7 to 10 days. So the first day, for example, Sandra, you're bringing them out into it. Give them only 2 to 3 hours access, and then let them go back to their back area or their lie back area. The next day, give them 3 or 4 hours access, and literally build it up gradually. And whatever you do, don't allow in hungry stock. So when you're putting them in the first day and the second day, essentially send them in full, so they don't gorge themselves. What do you call it? Because that's exactly what you don't want, because you'll get bloat and you'll get all sorts of issues.
Well, let's say they'll have their breakfast and their dinner, but they're going into the kale to have their tea.
For after supper, exactly. Strip graze, what do you call it? So long, narrow breaks. This will maximize utilization. It'll minimize wastage. The reason why is if you have a long, narrow break as opposed to a short, wide one. If you have a short, wide one, Sandra, because it's from a practicality point of view, they'll walk half it into the ground. Or a utilization point of view, they won't walk it into the ground. While if it's long and narrow, right, they can't walk too much of it into the ground because it's only, for example, if it's 200 meters long by a meter wide, well, they can't walk too much of it into the ground. It'll maximize the utilization, it'll minimize the wastage. And the other advantage of having a long, narrow feed fence is that all animals can graze together. So, for example, you won't have the biggest.
There's no bullying.
Exactly, the biggest and strongest getting in first, what do you call it, and then the runs that litter being left to last. Have a back fence. It's we already discussed that. That's particularly important if you're grazing the likes of if you're grazing the likes of your Redstart or your rape and you're hoping for them to regrow, right? If you're only grazing kale now at this stage of the year, you don't need to worry about a back fence, because the truth is there's nothing going to regrow at this stage. But if you were grazing the likes of your rapes or the likes of your Redstart back in June or July and you were hoping to get a subsequent grazing, it's very important to have a back fence. And then a double fence, I'll show you a slide on that. I'll show you a slide on that in a second. The double fence is just in case they break out. It's a little bit of extra safety. Okay.
Okay.
Fiber. So just brassicas, they're highly digestible. They're high in water soluble carbohydrates, so sugars. They're low in fiber. So just make sure to have your 30% fiber. Hay, straw, or poor quality silage. What I mean by that is we discussed silage crude protein levels. Ideally, if you the lower the crude protein of your silage, the better in this case.
In this case,
Yes, because you're not looking for a silage that's 16, 17, 18% like rocket fuel, because they're already on a very high protein diet. So you just want a fiber source. So hay, straw, or poor quality silage.
Perfect.
It'll stimulate the scratch factor chewing, and it slows down the rate of flow through the rumen. Equivalent to 0.3 kgs for a lamb per day, or equivalent to 2 to 4 kgs cattle per day. Right?
Okay, perfect.
They say a picture paints 1,000 words, what do you call it? So this just puts it into practice what we were explaining. You can see that they're grazing from the bottom to the top. The area in green is yeah, exactly. You then have today's fence, so that's where they're grazing, let's say in red. You then have tomorrow's fence, where we're obviously hoping to go into tomorrow. And then you have your bales in position, right? I'll come on to this in a minute, but if you can have a bales in position, it avoids going in with your tractor during the winter. And I say you have your trough also spread it out.
Okay.
God forbid, if they're as you can see where today is, right? So if they break out, Sandra, by having the double fence, right, they can only go into tomorrow's allocation. So they're, number one, it's easier to get them back in, right? It's easier to find them if they break out from a practical point of view. And number two, they can't do too much damage in terms of walking it into the ground or anything. So by having two fences, it's an extra insurance policy.
Exactly. Okay. No, that'd be the main system I would see.
Yeah. Okay. Last thing is
this is important here with the feeding of the minerals.
Yes, and this is just the last slide on the feeding point of view. Yeah, bear in mind, as I say, they're low in fiber. Any brassica crop, kale, rape, sweets, and turnips, they're low in fiber. They're high energy, high protein, but low in fiber and low in minerals, right? Particularly your copper, your cobalt, your iron, and selenium. So what we would suggest is a bolus or a lick. But from a practicality point of view, Sandra, and as I say, my uncle put it in 2018 in the drought. I was telling him at the time, put it in, give them a bolus, because a bolus, you know that every single animal is accounted for. While a lick, okay, you can put a lick in the middle of the field, and some of them will go to it, and some of them won't, and they won't all regulate themselves. While if you can go with a slow release, general purpose bolus, just make sure that, explain to your vet or wherever you're purchasing your bolus or your lick from, explain to him that there's animals going on to a brassica crop for the winter. You need it to be high in iodine in particular. And as I say, if it can be a slow release bolus, great. And you know that every animal, you bring them in, do them all in the crush before they go out, and you can rest assured then they're all covered.
Yeah, peace of mind.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is just I'm coming down the home straight now. You'll be all glad to know.
Yeah, because we've a few questions to look at, Dermot.
Perfect. Well,
you might have answered them, but
okay. Well, I have 3 slides here just with a couple of pictures, and if you like, I'll take your questions then.
Lovely. Great.
Move the electric fence every day. It just helps to maximize the utilization, to minimize the wastage, and it allows all animals to graze together. The long narrow feed fence. And say, this guy is putting up his second fence. He's double fencing it, so just in case they do break out. Ideally, Sandra, no tractors in winter. As I say, theory and practice are different things, and I understand what you call it. There's some people, when they were sowing them, they didn't get a chance to get in and put their bales in place. If they could have put their bales in place, that's absolutely great. Because as I say, it saves going in with machinery during the winter. If they can't, well, all I'd say to you is minimize the amount. And this particular slide is where a farmer was going in with bales of straw, right? But what he was hoping to do, bales of hay, I beg your pardon. What he was hoping to do is he was hoping to minimize the amount of times he was going in. So say, for example, we've 1, 2, 3, 4, we've roughly 8 bales here. So he went in with the tractor and trailer once with the 8 bales and pushed them all off the trailer.
Good idea.
Exactly. It saved him going in 8 times with one bale at a time. He just went in, drove across the field, tipped them or just pushed them off the trailer. So just minimize the amount of times. If you have to go in, okay, I understand, there's no problem at all, but just keep it to a minimum and try to be practical about it.
Perfect.
And then, as I say, long narrow feed face. It'll ensure that all animals are feeding together, and there's just no bullying, as I say, or no pushing and shoving. It makes for an easier life. It's like when you go into the pub and you have a long bar counter, and we can all go up and stand there, and we don't.
We'll need it when COVID goes.
Yes, exactly. Probably won't be today or tomorrow. But yes, now you have a couple of questions. Is it fire away?
I have. Just from an anonymous attendee there, what would be a good mineral to feed with brassicas? Like you're after talking there, you consult with your vet, you tell them the type of animals, you tell them what they're going on, you tell them for how long they're going on it, possibly November to February, and they're the best one to match it up, because they'll know what you're missing, and they'll have a bolus to match that for that type of animal.
If it can be a bolus as opposed to a feed leak, perfect.
Yeah. Is there any requirement for minerals in dry suckler cows prior 2 months before calving, if they're getting ad-live grass silage with a daily allocation? I would still be tempted to bolus.
I would still be tempted to bolus, and ideally, Sandra, right, we'd say, what do you call it, this is not for dry cows. The reason, now I'll cover to say, I'd say I have two comments on that, right? One, we recommend, and the last couple of slides are about digestive disorders, and it's recommended, right, that 4 to 6 weeks before calving, or before lambing, right, that you're supposed to remove any animals, right? As I say, that are 4 to 6 weeks away from calving. The other thing I would say is it's a very high energy feed, right, or high protein feed for dry cows, what do you call it? So as I say, it just,
they could get very fat on it.
Exactly. So if you could have heifers on it, or you could have, as I say, bullocks on it, it's choose your stock wisely. But I'd say 4 to 6 weeks, what do you call it, before calving, ideally take them off it.
Okay. Very good. Would ewes grazing stubble turnips due to lamb in early April need any supplementary concentrate? Assuming ample stocks of stubble turnips right up to the point of lambing. So in that case, again, you'd take
4 to 6 weeks.
Say that again, Dermot.
I'd say 4 to 6 weeks prior to lambing, I'd remove them. But do they need any additional concentrate? 110% no.
No.
No, 110%. It's a very popular question, Sandra, but no. As I say, all your brassicas, they're high in energy, high in protein, low in fibre, and low in minerals. But definitely don't need, what do you call it, any concentrate. No.
Okay. Another question on the Redstart. Good question. Do you recommend topping up with nitrogen a few weeks after sowing? Will going in with tractor result in damage to the crop?
It's a necessary evil, right? Good question.
Okay.
Very good question. What do you got? We'd say if you can split the application. So, for example, right, I'm just going to say, say for example, we have kale, right? But I know your question is related to Redstart, but that's besides the point, right? Say, for example, you have kale, right? And the recommendation for kale is typically, right, to say for 5 bags of 18-6-12, right? So that's what you're going to go with all together, right? In terms of your NP and K. But I wouldn't never advise anyone to go with the likes of 5 bags or something all in one go. So no, 100%.
No way.
If you could go with now the equivalent of 5 bags of 18-6-12, if you work out your NP and K, is to go with something like 3 bags of 10-10-20 and 2 bags of can. Now I personally would 10 times prefer the latter, the 3 bags of 10-10-20, because I'm a firm believer well sown is half grown. If you can start off with your 3 bags of 10-10-20 and top dress with can, that's what I would do. But will you do a little bit of damage to the crop by going in a month later and top dressing it? Yes, you will. But it's a necessary evil. If you didn't go in and top dress it, you wouldn't have much of a crop, and we wouldn't be advising to go with the likes of your 5 bags of 18-6-12 all in one application either. So no, yes, I would say it's necessarily evil, and yeah, it has to be done.
Okay. Is there any experience of grazing dry cull cows, so they're going to the factory, or forward store heifers on Redstart that will be finished off grass next summer on Redstart? My ground is very dry and free draining. Is there anything I should be aware of? Your
ground is very dry, free draining, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah, well then perfect. Is there anything? No, that's ideal, because you're grazing it and then you're going back onto grass. So that's absolutely perfect. I think your animals will literally hit the ground running. You'll have no, like as you said, Sandra, they're going from a high protein feed onto a high protein grass. Like there'll be no time for you won't need any time for them to be, they're not going, like it's not a major transition like going from silage to grass. They're going from a high protein feed onto a high protein feed. That's absolutely excellent. And a free draining ground, that's perfect, because if weather does turn nasty, what you got to like at the moment, they won't do too much damage. So no, that's great. That's perfect.
Okay. Robert had a question. He's a field of Swedes for sheep. Good crop, he says. What kind of utilization can he expect? What percentage of the Swede crop will be utilized?
Oh, but
Dermot.
it's the same. What you got? You're looking at 80, 85, 90%. There's no reason why they won't. What you got it? As I say, Swedes, stubble turnips. What do you got it? They'll graze the leaf first, and then they'll graze the bulb. But there's they'll, like, if you give them time, they will graze 100% of the bulb. There's no reason why they won't. So you're going to be left with very little wastage. Yeah. There's no reason why you would increase wastage.
Another one on the Redstart. How little bale silage can you get away with? Right. So we answered this on our 30%.
Our 30% is certainly 20%. Certainly 20-25%, but ideally, 30% fibre. Yeah. Okay.
This he obviously has a good crop of Redstart. Is saying will struggle to finish field before spring with present stocking rate, weaning bulls and store steers. So. Yeah, this is something I'd commonly come across, and I definitely did in 2018. The crop went in, good take, very successful growth rate, but unfortunately it exceeded expectations. And the stock that the farmer had, he didn't get it finished. And I think you answered it earlier that if it gets to the point in February, March, that if it starts flowering, you might have to give up the ghost on the remaining part and plough it in.
Absolutely. Or alternatively, Sandra, he has one. A hindsight is 20/20 vision, and that man is not looking at it in hindsight. He knows now that he's going to struggle to do it. So if he knows now, if he's in a position to get extra stock, well, sure, he won't need to plough any of it into the ground. Yeah. And the only thing I'd say to him about, for example, if he has that stock, if he has stock already on it, so say he has a bumper crop and he's in it 3 weeks or a month already at this stage, what do you call it? Well, then the only thing I would say is, and he built it, he introduced him to it slowly, built him up gradually. Do the very same for your new stock. So if you're bringing in new stock, just bear that in mind. They're new stock. They need to, you need to allow them time to acclimatize and accustom as well. That's all.
Okay.
But if you can bring in new stock to help you get through it, perfect. You won't need to give up the ghost on any of it. But as I say, treat the new stock the very same as you treated your stock day one. Give them time.
Okay. This is a good question on this. On the Redstart again, rather than the hassle of giving a bolus, this farmer was thinking of giving a small bit of meal daily in troughs with a dust of high selenium, cobalt, copper and iodine mineral on top of the meal. Have you any experience of this rather than the bolus? I don't, but
either, but yeah.
It is an option. It's just this farmer hasn't mentioned what kind of stock it is.
And the other thing is just going back to being practical again. Will the biggest and the fittest survive? As in, will they go out and graze the majority of what you call it of the meal and lick a bit of dusting, and then again, not all of your stock are getting that dusting. The reason that, and please don't, I'm not trying to be repetitive, but the reason I harp on about the bolus is just it gives me peace of mind, Sandra. I know that every animal is accounted for. Yeah. But if I go in and dust what you got it, not every animal is going to get the same amount. Not every animal is going to do you know what I mean? It's a safer bet.
Okay.
But there's no reason why he couldn't get away with it. But I just like the idea of a bolus because or a lick, because it's just, as I say, it's my extra insurance. You know.
Okay. There's 2 comments on it, and we've just 2 questions. The last question is on feed required for weanlings, right? And I know you're going to just quickly go through because I'm conscious of time. We're at 8:30. But question then on the best time to move sheep to allow regrowth and not damage the stock. I don't think there's any problem. The sheep don't really damage the stock.
No, what you got? No, I'd say there's no time, right? I would just say the main stock, right? So your main stock, if you leave that, right, and you literally leave 7 or 8 or 9 inches behind. So you could go into a crop that could be 2 foot tall, right? And if you just leave the main stock and leave 7 or 8 inches growth, then it will regrow, no problem at all. So it's just like anything. Don't hammer it right down to the ground just to 3 or 4 inches, because if you hammer it right down to the ground, the main stem right down to the ground to 3 or 4 inches, it won't regrow. It won't be allowed to photosynthesize. It won't be allowed to come again. But if you leave the main stem and you leave, as I say, 7 or 8 inches, what you got it behind, it will regrow. Go out with your compound, what you got, put up your back fence, go out with your compound, your bit of peas and case, and absolutely it will regrow. I'd say there's no particular time, just I'd say allow 8 or 9 inches of growth on the main stem, leave that behind, and it'll come back again.
Okay, and last question here. If I set a crop of Redstart in May, bale it during the summer, is it okay to apply slurry or dung immediately after baling? I don't think there's an issue.
I personally go with, the only reason I wouldn't go with a slurry, or the only reason I'd try go with a chemical compound, I'd only be worried about from a tan point of view. If you got adequate rain, if I'd picked one of the two, I'd probably go with the slurry. And I'd leave.
Okay.
Yeah, ideally I'd leave the dung until after I was perhaps, like if you're after going in with Redstart, right, I think dung would be an absolute brilliant fertilizer to go in with afterwards, to then put before you put it back into grass, for example, right? So say you were going back to grass next spring or whatever, I think it'd be great to go with dung and then plow that in or disc it in or whatever the case may be. If I had to use an organic fertilizer, yeah, I'd probably use the slurry. And yeah, just I'd say make sure what you'll have plenty of time in terms of you're not going to be grazing it in 3 weeks or anything. So yeah, there's no reason why you couldn't go with slurry. I'd leave me dung until perhaps I was reseeding it. But if you could go with chemical compound, yeah, either or, there's no problem.
Okay, I don't know whether this is more common. I'm just reading it here. It's from Matthew. He's doing a Leaving Cert Ag Science project on comparing strip grazing typhon with meal for finishing spring-born lambs after weaning. Results have been similar. We'll continue to do a catch crop. What should we follow typhon to improve production? One crop we haven't mentioned now.
I presume what that means is what he's going in with typhon, what he's going in with his typhon afterwards. More likely, it's going to be going back to grass. I think, is that what he means? Is that what?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm guessing it's going to be.
Yeah, I'm probably not reading it right, Matthew, so I do apologize.
But as I say, we can get back to him afterwards. There's absolutely no problem. But one thing I just have to notice he's after saying though, is he after saying that he's getting similar growth rates with typhon compared to concentrate?
He actually has two comments here. Yeah, as I say, what we'll do is maybe Matthew might contact either of us and we can follow up on that one.
Absolutely.
For maybe tomorrow or the next day if he contacts either of us.
Yeah, 100%.
Great. Okay, so you've just one or two more slides to kind of quickly run through there, Dermot, because we are at.
Yep, no, that's okay. Stocking rate. So how much do I need to feed you? So measure the crop. So how do you measure a crop? You go out with a meter squared, right? So a quadrat, right? So you go out and you cut it right down to the grazing height. Yeah. At this stage, right, you're going to graze it right down to 4 inches, so 10 centimeters. What you got? You're going to graze it down because say you're not going to get graze it as low as they'll graze it. What you got it? You're not going to get a regrowth in the month of November, December, right? So cut it right down to 4 inches. Okay. Repeat that several times throughout the field just to get a representative sample, right? The same principle as if you were soil testing or whatever. And the typical dry matter of any brassica will be between 10 and 14%. So your kales, what you got it, will be up a little bit higher, or your Redstarts, what you got it. As I say, what do you call it? And that will allow you to work out the average dry matter per meter squared. Okay, so just this is a practical example, right? So if you have a heifer, right, which is 270 kg, what do you call it, weaning, right, eating 3% live weight, right? To say dry cows, for example, will consume 2% live weight, what do you call it, a weaning would consume 3% if they're being outwintered, right? So that's 8 kgs of dry matter per day, Sandra, right? 70% of the diet is the ideal amount to be made up for brassica. So 70% of 8 kgs gives you 5.6 kgs, right? In this scenario, right, the farmer has 25 animals, right? So 25 times 5.6 gives you 140 kgs of dry matter is what they will consume daily, right? It's it's a crop of Redstart, right? So we're a good crop of Redstart doing 10 ton per hectare, right? And we're going to estimate what you got it, he'll get 85% utilization, right? So he's not going to leave too much behind.
That's very good, yeah.
Yeah, so 85% utilization, right? Divide that by, if you get that's 8.5 tons, right, of dry matter per hectare they're going to utilize. So that 85 tons, you divide that by 10,000, because there's 10,000 square meters in an acre, you end up getting a figure of 0.85 kgs of dry matter per meter, right? Okay, so divide that, right? That's your yield. Divide that into your 140 kgs, which is what your 25 animals need, their daily requirement, and you get a figure of 165 meters, right? They require of brassica per day, right? The length of
Okay.
the feed face is 110, right? So your long narrow feed face is 110. 110 divided by 165 gives you 1.5. In simple English, they need to move the fence. The farmer needs to move his fence 1.5 meters per day to consume 70% of the brassica.
Perfect.
Or 70% brassica.
That's great, because that's one of the last questions that we hadn't come to. Jonathan, I hope that answers your question there. He's a similar size animal on a similar crop. He was asking that question.
And just to bear in mind what you got, this presentation has been recorded and emailed out. So in the next couple of days, Jonathan, you will get an email of this presentation. You can flick down through this slide, what you call it, or sorry, you'll be able to forward on the presentation to get to this slide, and you can pause it and you can put in your own calculations there. So don't be panicking if you can't work it out tonight.
Perfect.
Now,
so the last couple of slides then are just on the digestive disorders.
Yes, and the first thing I would say about them is they're normally not a problem, Sandra, once the animals are given adequate time to adjust, what you call it, and that is the key to brassica crops, as I say, kale, rape, swedes, turnips.
Yeah.
Introduce them slowly, 1 to 2 hours access per day when you're starting off. Don't turn them in, what you call it, when they're hungry. Make sure they're full stomachs. Ensure they have sufficient fibre, so the 70-30 rule, and bolus for minerals, right? Most times, if there is a problem, it'll prevent itself early in the day. So particularly in the first 2 weeks, I'd say monitor them closely. If you can check them certainly once a day. If you can check them twice a day, great. Okay.
Yeah, and if anything's not suitable, they'll be gone off in that 7 to 10 days.
Exactly, because most times what you got, well, not most times, that's not fair to say, but sometimes you will come across an animal that just won't take for whatever reason. It just don't take what you like. If me or you a new food, what you got, I might like it. 10 other of my friends might like it. You might like it. What you got? That's just the way it is. So, yeah, sometimes.
You see, that doesn't happen when I eat chocolate.
Well, it doesn't happen with me either, or potatoes either. That's it. So just the most, I suppose, it's not fair to say common, but the one or two things that you do come across if there is an issue, I just said there's 4 of them here. So goiter, what you got? So brassicas contain glucosinolates, which block the uptake of iodine from the diet. So brassicas are also low in iodine, and this further increases the risk. Okay, so say pregnant animals grazing in brassicas are most at risk. So be the ewes, be the heifers, take them off what they got cows. 4 to 6 weeks, remove any animals prior to calving, right? So that answers, I think we had 2 questions on that tonight.
We did, yeah. So once again, the bolus is important.
Exactly. Yeah, because you don't want to be giving birth to offspring with goiter. Bloat. So as I say, we're after alluding to it a couple of times. Don't turn animals in when they're hungry. Introduce them slowly. So because the introduction of a feed always presents the risk of rumen upsets. So a sudden change, and that's the sudden change in the diet of any animal.
Yeah.
So as I say, they're rapidly degraded in the rumen because they're high in sugars. Remove any animals displaying symptoms immediately. Increase the fibre. And yeah, as I say, speak to your vet. But one thing about bloat, it's easy to identify.
Exactly. Yeah.
Exactly. Animal nitrates. So brassicas, what do you call it? If I alluded to earlier when I was saying that if you have a sudden uptake in nitrogen, the farmer that came across from Roscommon, the crop ended up lodging. But another issue, what you got, if you had a sudden uptake in nitrogen, is you could end up with nitrates. So brassicas contain are high in nitrate, which can cause nitrate, which can cause nitrite poisoning and converts to nitrate in the rumen.
Very complicated.
Yes, a bit of a tongue twister there. So allow crops adequate time to utilize the nitrogen. So once you put it out, what you got it 2 units a day in good growing conditions, they say. Never introduce hungry animals onto a brassica, and over 10 days and ensure no more than 70% of the diet.
Okay. You have one more. Okay. Amelia, yes.
Yes, forage brassicas contain excess levels of amino acids, which when absorbed into the bloodstream can cause anemia. So higher risk when animals are fed 100% brassica, as I say, and mature crops closer to flower. So that's why it comes back to, can you get away
70-30?
Yeah, they did a trial where they got away with it on kale, but I just think the safer bet is put in give them the fibre and let them regulate themselves. If they don't.
But if a farmer's gone to the bother and growing the crop, you want to be aware of these things. You don't want to go into this, do the 70-30 rule. That's why it's there. There's a reason for it.
Exactly.
Yeah. Just a point there from Germinal. The recording of this is going to be available on Monday. Okay. Perfect. For anyone. And there was a good question there, just coming in from the end there for Graham. For multi-grazings, so like what you said, you're 10 acres and divided up into 4, Dermot. What he asks is, do you go back into the plot after the first grazing and re-fertilize it for the second and the third grazing?
Absolutely. So go back into it. Yeah, if you're it's not going to, please don't think this is a smart answer, but it's not going to grow in fresh air. You're going to have to feed it again, what do you call it? So yeah, just put up your back fence and make sure they don't go back, so that they don't go back and regraze the fresh shoots, and and go back in with your fertilizer. Ideally, what I'd say to Graham is a bit of compound. I just think it's great, what do you call it, as in the peas and case. Don't just go with straight nitrogen, what do you call it, because they're producing a lot of leaf and leaf hard on K, so you need to, what do you call it, as I say, a little bit of K and a bit of P along with it. Great, what do you call it, I just think compound works perfect, you know. So just in summary,
so you give a bit of just a summary slide there on what we've covered.
And what I mean by planning is important, start early. So if you can have your bales in place in the field, great, what do you call it, free draining size, good pH, good P's and K's, simple system but attention to detail. So as I say, move the fence every day, long narrow feed press. But there is, Sandra, multiple benefits to be got. As I say, we're going back to what our fathers and our grandfathers did. So some of those benefits increase your overall forage yields, break crops or crop rotation point of view, reduce labour, increase farm carrying capacity, cost saving, what you got, because they're being out wintered, they're healthier, and it will 100% improve your soil health and soil fertility. Yeah.
Good for the soil, good for the animal, good for the farmer.
And clearly, Sandra, one take-home message I'm after getting from tonight is there's obviously a lot of Redstart out there in the ground anyway, because most of those questions were about Redstart. So
let's hope it's all Germinal Redstart seed now, Dermot.
Me, because I was saying that I was one of the most popular hybrids, so they didn't make a liar of me anyway, thank God.
That's great. Listen, I want to thank the people. We had a brilliant number of people on the webinar tonight. I want to thank those that are still on. I think I've gone through all the questions. If we didn't cover them exactly right, they were definitely in the presentation. As I say, the recording will be available Monday. And if you wouldn't mind the survey that you'll fit in at the end of this webinar, just to give us feedback. As I say, you can't approve what you don't know. So if there's something that's not working, let them know. And thanks, Keith. There, he's after saying great presentation. So we've done a good job for Keith anyway.
Thank you. Keith.
So thanks to our listeners, and thanks to Zoe as well. Getting good feedback here, Dermot. You're not doing a bad job. So I want to thank everybody for joining us this evening. Hope you got something out of it. And we'll see you all again soon. Thanks, Dermot.
Thanks a million, Sandra. And the only thing I'd like to say, I apologise on our behalf again for going over time. But the only thing I would say is it was great to get the questions. I'm going to say that it wasn't our fault, Sandra. I'm going to say that it was due to the question. And it's great from our point of view. It's great to get questions because, as I say, by talking to the farmers that are doing it, what do you call it, the practical questions that are doing it on the hard face or whatever, the cold face. So it's great. Thanks a million. Thank you very much.
No bother. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for the feedback.
Bye-bye.
Thanks very much.